Natalie Turner had been married to Adrian Brooks for 5 years when she first saw the post that split her world apart. She wasn't expecting it, not on that quiet afternoon in Denver, not when she thought her life was at least stable, if not blissful. The post came from Rachel Cruz, the woman Adrian had once confessed was the love he never got to have, the dream he had tucked away in his heart. Rachel had uploaded a picture of a property deed, and beneath it were words that made Natalie's blood run cold. "Thank you, Adrian, for transferring this house to me." Natalie's eyes locked on the address printed on the deed, her stomach dropping as though the floor had given way. It was their house, the home she had built her marriage in, the place where she had laughed and cried and prayed that her husband still loved her. She didn't write a long comment, didn't hurl accusations or demand explanations. All she left under the post was a single period, one dot, that carried the weight of her devastation. Her phone rang almost immediately, Adrian's name flashing across the screen, and she answered with trembling hands. His voice came sharp, laced with irritation, as if she were the one at fault. He said Rachel was a poor single mother, that he had only transferred the house to her so her child would have a stable place, close to a good school. It had nothing to do with Natalie, nothing that would affect their life together. He accused her of being heartless, of lacking compassion, of being incapable of kindness. And in the background, faint but undeniable, Natalie heard the fragile sobs of Rachel, the woman who had taken everything from her. Half an hour later, Rachel posted again, this time tagging Natalie directly as though to humiliate her more publicly. The photo was of a brand new Mercedes gleaming under the Denver sun, with the caption "Paid in full." They say a man's love is shown by where he spends his money. Natalie didn't need to ask who had bought it. She knew Adrian had given Rachel this car, just as he had given away their home, just as he had stripped away every ounce of dignity Natalie had left. For the first time, she no longer felt anger or confusion, but something colder, sharper, resolute. That was the moment she decided she would divorce him. When Adrian returned home that night, Natalie was sitting at the table with a small birthday cake in front of her and a pill bottle beside it. It was her birthday, though Adrian had never once remembered the date correctly. She had bought the cake herself, waiting in vain for him to come home so she could share the news that she was pregnant, a fragile spark of hope that perhaps their marriage could be saved. She had waited until after 7 in the evening, calling, texting, getting no reply. It wasn't until she commented under Rachel's deed post that Adrian called, not to celebrate her birthday or to ask about her day, but to scold her as though she were a child who had misbehaved. By then, her fury had turned into a physical pain, and the stress had triggered bleeding. She had taken a mifepristone pill. Earlier, the one meant for early terminations, because she knew, even if the baby lived, Adrian had already destroyed the family she thought she could give it. Adrian walked in, eyes catching on the cake and the bottle, frowning. "Whose birthday?" he asked carelessly. "Yours." She quietly put the pill bottle away, threw the cake into the trash, and said, "No, it was for a friend." He sighed with relief, muttering that he remembered her birthday was at the end of September, not today, the 8th. 5 years of marriage, and he had never once remembered the right date, but Natalie had seen him celebrate Rachel's birthday, as though it were etched in his soul. He sat beside her almost casually and placed a teddy bear in her hands. "Rachel wanted you to have this," he said, and then added that Natalie had frightened Rachel and should call to apologize. Natalie stared at the bear, the Mercedes logo stitched into its fabric, the kind of free gift dealerships handed out with luxury cars. Her stomach turned. She told him she didn't need it, her voice calm, detached. Adrian's face darkened, his frustration mounting. "Why are you acting this way?" he snapped. Rachel had been the one brave enough to reach out to apologize, so why couldn't Natalie be the bigger person and do the same? When she remained silent, his patience snapped. He grabbed her arm, pulling her up with a force that slammed her against the cold glass of the coffee table. Pain shot up her leg where her old burn wound reopened. Just a week ago, he had spilled a bowl of hot porridge down her right leg because he had been too busy texting Rachel while carrying it from the kitchen. The burn had blistered, leaving her limping, and now blood seeped fresh from the wound. Adrian's expression shifted to one of panic. He muttered that he would take her to the hospital. Natalie didn't argue, didn't protest, simply said fine. They got into the car, the silence heavy until the Bluetooth speakers crackled and Rachel's syrupy voice filled the air. "Welcome home, my love," she cooed. "Don't forget to make lots of money for me to spend." Adrian's face paled, fumbling for an excuse. He said it was an old recording Rachel had left on the system. He'd been meaning to delete it to throw the device away. Natalie told him there was no need, her voice flat as stone, because she no longer cared. Once she would have screamed, cried, begged him to stop humiliating her, but now she was numb. Adrian looked at her in disbelief, asking if she wasn't angry. She pressed her lips together and told him to just drive. They were late already. The hospital was only a mile away, just a simple turn would have taken them there. But then Adrian's phone rang, and Rachel's laughter spilled into his ear, asking him to teach her how to drive the Mercedes with one hand. Adrian's lips curved into a smile, and he told Natalie he would drop her off across the street. It was only 50 meters to the hospital, he said she could manage. He didn't want to waste time. Natalie stared at him, her voice low but firm, saying she couldn't walk. His patience evaporated. "Stop exaggerating," he said coldly. "You're hurt, but you're not crippled." He pulled the car over, opened the passenger door, and hauled her out, telling her to call him when she was done. Then he sped away the tires, splashing dirty water across her leg, soaking into her wound. Rain began to fall, thin needles of drizzle soaking her hair, her clothes, her skin. The world blurred not just from the rain, but from the tears stinging her eyes. 50 meters. Such a short distance, but each step was agony. Sweat cold against her spine, pain rising from her abdomen with every movement until she collapsed on the white stripes of the crosswalk. Cars sped past, horns blaring, but she couldn't move. Her body shook, her breath ragged, her vision narrowing to a tunnel of darkness. It was only the quick intervention of a hospital security guard that saved her from being struck. He rushed to her side, pulling her out of the road, calling for help as Natalie slipped into unconsciousness, her last thought not of Adrian or Rachel, but of the child she would never hold, and the love that had already died long before this night. If it hadn't been for the security guard at the hospital gates pulling me out of the road that night, I might have been crushed beneath the rush of headlights that never slowed down. My body had already betrayed me, weak and shaking, and though I managed to stumble back home, hours later, I collapsed onto the bed in exhaustion. I thought I would be left in peace to rest, but the door banged open and Adrian stormed in, with anger already curling on his tongue. He scolded me, his voice sharp and cutting, demanding why I hadn't called him after I was treated, insisting that he had waited at the hospital entrance for over an hour, while my phone was turned off. I lifted my eyes to him, tired, hollow, the faint smell of antiseptic still clinging to me from the IV drip that had kept me alive for 2 hours. I told him I hadn't seen his car outside, that I had been too weak and had to take a cab home. The truth was simpler, harsher. My phone had only been off for a few minutes, and in those minutes Adrian had convinced himself he had been the abandoned one, not me. This was the same man who once fussed over me when I sneezed, who used to notice every small detail of my mood, who used to care. Somewhere along the line he had stopped, and I had never noticed the exact moment the warmth went out of him. He had blocked my number before cutting me off entirely, making it impossible to reach him when I needed him most. His fury seemed to soften for a breath when he saw how pale I was. He put down a takeout container and said he had brought me congee, that he had thought I would be hungry. I looked at the bowl, a few lonely scallions floating in weak broth, no century egg, no pork, nothing but the scraps of someone else's meal. Just half an hour earlier, Rachel had posted a photo of him in her kitchen, stirring a pot with the caption, "Who says good men don't exist?" Not only did he teach me to drive a Mercedes with one hand, he even cooked me congee, and it smells divine. My lips twisted in a bitter smile as I forced a spoonful down my stomach, cramping with nausea, pushing it away. I told him I didn't want it. His expression darkened instantly, the kindness gone, his eyes narrowing. "What is it this time?" he demanded. "What insanity are you acting out now?" I went out of my way to buy you food, and you throw it back in my face. Is this about the house? Is this about me helping Rachel? Did I forbid you anything?" She only thanked me for making sure her child has a safe place to live. "And you? You couldn't stop yourself from making a petty little comment under her post, and I didn't hold it against you. But you won't let it go." I had no strength left, not even to defend myself. I whispered that he had misunderstood, that when I commented, I was only confused why the address on the deed was ours. But Adrian cut me off with a sharp laugh, parroting Rachel's words, telling me that I was exactly what she had described: short-tempered, narrow, never generous, never forgiving, always suspicious of any woman he spoke to. The problem, he said, was not him, it was me. Once I would have fought back, raising my voice, begging him to see me for who I truly was. Now I simply stared at him, my silence louder than any plea. When he finally ran out of breath, I asked quietly if he was done, and then requested if he could at least turn off the lights. He glared at me, slammed the doors so hard the walls shook, and left the lamp burning. A few seconds later, another slam echoed from the living room. In the past, every time he walked out angry to spend the night at Rachel's, I would lie awake all night, tears soaking the pillow. But that night, with only my own heartbeat for company, I slept soundly for the first time in years. In the morning, I woke clear-headed, and instead of despair, I felt resolve. I called a friend and asked for the name of a lawyer. The decision had been planted in my chest the moment I saw our home given away. But now it had rooted deep. Adrian didn't speak to me for 3 days, a cold silence that once would have driven me frantic, but now only confirmed what I already knew. The next time I saw his face was not in our kitchen or our bedroom, but in a photograph one of his friends posted online. A group photo from a beach trip, and there he was standing side by side with Rachel Cruz. Both of them wearing matching outfits, her smile shining triumphant. I didn't comment, didn't scream, didn't call. I simply tapped the heart button, a quiet acknowledgement, and waited. It didn't take long. My phone rang, Adrian's voice breezy, as though nothing had happened. He said he would pick me up later, that he wanted to take me out to the beach to meet his friends. He paused before adding almost smugly that it wasn't about reconciliation, that he simply wanted to reward me for behaving better lately. I agreed, my voice calm, because the paperwork for the divorce was already in progress. He would never know until it was too late. True to his word, he arrived that afternoon without Rachel by his side. It was strange, almost unsettling. At the shore, Jack Thompson, his boisterous friend, greeted me with an exaggerated grin. He clapped me on the shoulder and apologized for not including me in their last get-together, promising to make it up by downing 3 shots as penance. He played the clown to give me face in front of everyone, and I returned his gesture with a polite smile. He tried to fill the silence with small talk, saying he had heard I convinced top talent to join the company, that there was talk of opening a new branch in Aspen, and he congratulated me. I smiled faintly, admitting there were plans, but added that whether they would come to fruition was still uncertain. My words hung in the salt air, light and empty, but behind them a storm was building, because I knew the night would not end without Rachel's shadow falling once again between Adrian and me. Just as the sun sank lower and the wind off the water grew cooler, Adrian strode toward me, his face clouded with irritation, his eyes sharp. "So you are planning to expand to Aspen?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me first? Did I give you permission?" I turned my head, slowly meeting his anger with calm, my expression neutral, and the silence between us thickened until it pressed like a weight on everyone standing nearby. His voice rose, accusing, demanding, and the tension bled into the air until Jack Thompson laughed too loudly and tried to smooth things over, suggesting we set up the grill and eat instead of arguing. A few of the men busied themselves with charcoal and skewers, while Adrian dropped heavily into the sand beside me, his handsome face carrying a trace of unease that he rarely allowed anyone to see. He leaned close, lowering his voice as if it were a gift, and said he had already discussed it with Rachel that once her child finished elementary school, he would transfer the other houses to her name. There was no need for me to be upset, he said, because the properties belonged to him anyway, and technically he didn't owe me an explanation. I nodded lightly, offering only a flat "oh" in return. My tone so indifferent it barely counted as acknowledgement. Not long after, a familiar figure appeared in the distance, her stride slow but deliberate, her smile stretching wide as though she owned the entire scene. My own smile froze instantly. A young man, clearly close to both Adrian and Jack, saw her approach and shouted across the sand with the enthusiasm of a boy who didn't know any better. "Your late sister-in-law," he called. "Adrian is here. Hurry up." The air went still, a collective intake of breath, and Jack swore under his breath, kicking the boy hard in the shin, his face pale with the weight of his mistake. I rose slowly, carefully, because I didn't want to create a spectacle, didn't want to claw or cry or scream before so many witnesses. I only wanted to preserve the final scraps of dignity that still clung to me. Adrian glanced between us, first at me, then at Rachel, but he didn't follow me when I walked away. By the time I turned back, everyone had settled onto the sand as though nothing had happened. Rachel had slid into the space beside him, their shoulders brushing, their laughter too warm, too intimate. I chose a spot further down the shore, out of reach of their shadows, and sat quietly. Jack, ever the peacemaker, clapped his hands and suggested a game to lighten the mood. "Truth or dare," he announced, and the circle grew tense and eager. In the first round, Adrian won, Rachel lost, and she chose truth. Adrian asked her softly what happy thing had happened to her lately, and Rachel's lashes lowered as she turned the answer into a dagger, her gaze lingering on him with deliberate sweetness. "I met a wonderful man," she said, "and in one day I got a house, a car, and the kind of care every woman dreams of. He even taught me to drive a Mercedes with one hand." When she finished, she flicked a triumphant glance in my direction, her lips curving in satisfaction. Everyone knew the source of her sudden fortune, but in gatherings like this, politeness usually covered sins with silence. Yet she tore away the veil, shoving her victory in my face, forcing the others into discomfort so heavy that even Jack looked unsettled. I stayed silent, refusing to give her the satisfaction of my rage, and Jack quickly steered the game onward, declaring it was my turn. "The great beauty Natalie Turner," he teased, and Rachel's eyes lit with malice. This time she offered me a dare, pressing a glass of liquor into my hand as she sauntered forward. "Let's make it interesting, Natalie," she said sweetly. "Do you dare?" My instincts screamed, every nerve bristling, and I replied that I would choose truth. She pouted, pretending to be disappointed, urging me to accept the dare, swearing she wasn't going to make it hard. Then she lifted her chin and said, since Adrian had told her I was such a strong swimmer, why not prove it to everyone? Swim a lap in the dark sea to entertain the group. Her eyes dropped deliberately to my stomach, her expression sharp with insinuation. I shook my head at once. "I wasn't well," I said firmly. "I couldn't swim tonight." She turned to Adrian with a wounded look, her eyes shimmering with false tears. His frown deepened, his voice sharp. "You were a competitive swimmer," he reminded me. "This is what you were good at, and now you refuse. She's apologized to you. She's tried to make peace, and all she asks is a little swim. Can't you be reasonable?" Then he stood and took hold of me with Rachel, ignoring my resistance, dragging me toward the waves. Rachel tugged off my jacket with a flourish, tilting back a bottle of liquor and downing it in one long gulp before thrusting the empty bottle in the air. "I drink to you," she cried. "Show us your performance." She punished herself with alcohol to make me look like the one unwilling to play. My patience broke. I told her clearly that I had already said no, that no amount of drinking on her part would change my decision. Why couldn't I simply choose truth like anyone else? Her eyes filled with theatrical hurt, her lips trembling, and the tension in Adrian's face turned stormy. He slammed a bottle down into the sand so hard it shattered shards glinting under the firelight. "You think you're too good for this," he shouted. "You think you're above everyone else." She already drank to show sincerity, and you can't even move a finger. Rachel sniffled beside him, tears sliding down her cheeks, and he bristled with protective fury. I looked at them, at his posture shielding her as though she were fragile glass at her sobbing act, and I let a cold laugh slip past my lips. Did I tell her to drink? I asked. I said no, and she forced me. Isn't that what making things difficult looks like? My words hung in the salt air, sharp and unyielding, and Rachel's sobs only grew louder, as though she could drown out the truth itself. Adrian's face darkened until it looked carved from stone, his jaw tight as he rolled up his sleeves. Fine, he said coldly. If you won't swim, I will swim with you. The words barely left his mouth before his hand shot out, tangling in my hair, dragging me toward the water with a strength that shocked even the friends who had gathered to laugh and drink around the fire. Gasps rippled across the beach as he shoved me beneath the waves. The cold bit into me like knives, rushing from my toes up into my spine until my body convulsed. Salt water surged into my nose, filling my lungs, and I choked violently, my arms flailing for air. Adrian's grip did not loosen. I looked up through burning eyes, water and tears, blurring together, the roar of the ocean muffling the sound of my own screams. When my chest felt like it would explode, when my lungs shrieked for oxygen, I clawed against him with the last of my strength. Only then did he finally release me. A wave crashed hard, tossing me into the undertow, and instinct had me reaching for him, for the man who was supposed to be my protector, clutching at the leg of his jeans. He responded by kicking me away with brutal force, sending me spinning into the surf. The sea swallowed me whole, its icy grip dragging me under. Darkness and cold pressed into my skin, until I thought I might never break the surface again. I fought kicking arms, pushing upward, and with one last desperate surge, I broke through, coughing, gulping air in ragged bursts, as though I had been reborn. When I staggered back to the shallows, shaking, Adrian was already on the sand, one arm wrapped around Rachel's trembling shoulders, his voice low and gentle, soothing her. "Don't cry," he murmured. "I've punished her already. She got what she deserved. From now on, I'll make sure she learns her place." Then he turned to me, towering above me, his expression like ice, and said Rachel's name again, telling me to apologize, telling me to drink as a punishment in front of everyone or else, but I cut him off. My voice raw, my eyes blazing red from seawater and tears. "Enough, Adrian. Wait for my lawyer to contact you. We are getting a divorce." Silence crashed over the group. Adrian's eyes widened in disbelief, the bravado draining into shock. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned away, my body frail, each step unsteady, as I dragged myself toward the road beyond the sand. The lights of Denver shimmered faintly in the distance, but my vision swam and dimmed until everything collapsed into black. I faintly heard voices shouting, someone screaming to call an ambulance, someone else crying that I was bleeding too much. The rest dissolved until I awoke to the sound of Tracy Miller's furious voice tearing through the haze. "Adrian Brooks, are you insane? How could you force her into the water? Do you not understand? She just lost a pregnancy." My ears rang with the weight of her words. Another voice, Adrian's strangled and hoarse, stammered in shock. "She was pregnant. Why didn't she tell me?" Tracy's anger cut him down like a whip. "Are you blind? Look at her, at how weak she's been, at how pale. How could you not see? Or were your eyes so glued to Rachel Cruz that you couldn't notice the woman who was dying right in front of you?" Her voice shook with rage, and I almost smiled, imagining her slapping him, if not for the walls of the hospital around us. "I didn't know," Adrian whispered, softer now, guilt clinging to every word. "I swear I didn't know," Tracy spat back at him. "You knew enough to give away your house to that manipulative fox, to buy her a luxury car, to parade her around while your wife bled alone. You knew that much, and yet you claim ignorance now. You're a disgrace. Get out. Get out of this room before I throw you out myself." The room fell quiet after his footsteps retreated, the silence like a balm. Slowly I opened my eyes, blinking at the harsh light overhead, and saw Tracy sitting heavily in a chair beside me. Relief softened her features as she brushed damp hair from my forehead. "You're awake," she said gently. "How do you feel?" My throat tightened, my eyes wet, and I whispered if she already knew. She sighed, tapping me lightly on the head in exasperation, her face equal parts love and scolding. Of course I knew. I warned you not to marry him, didn't I? And now here we are. Tears slipped from the corners of my eyes as memories clawed their way up the years I had wasted, believing in a man who treated love like a convenience. If not for my own blindness, if not for the way I let my heart overrule reason, my parents would never have allowed me to marry him. I thought of the first time our families met, the way I had stumbled upon his mother in the restroom, whispering into her phone, adjusting the dowry down from $500,000 to $200,000. Because in her words, my family wasn't worth more. I thought of the night 3 years into our marriage, when Adrian drunkenly admitted the truth, laughing that of course he knew his mother had asked his approval first. "You're too naive, Natalie," he had slurred. "No wonder people say girls in love are the easiest to fool." Now, as I lay in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm, the illusion stripped away, I finally saw him clearly. He was not a tragic lover torn between two women. He was not a man blinded by passion. He was simply selfish, always taking, never giving, cloaking his betrayals in excuses. A hypocrite in every sense. At some point, he slipped back into the room, his eyes wet, his voice breaking, as he whispered apologies. "Natalie, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know you were pregnant." But I felt no warmth, no forgiveness. Only the deep chill of an ocean I had nearly drowned in. I cut him off, my voice sharp and cold. "You love Rachel, Adrian, then divorce me and marry her. I wish you both happiness." Panic flickered in his eyes, his hands twisting his body, leaning forward as if to cling to me. "No, Natalie, no, I don't want a divorce. I don't love her. I never loved her. If I did, why would I have married you?" His desperation might once have moved me, but now it only drew a bitter laugh from my lips. "Do you expect me to forget the words you confessed that night? The night you told her you regretted proposing to me in a moment of impulse, that if you divorced me, she would be the first woman you married. Were those words a lie?" His face drained of color. I remembered it too clearly. The party that ended in drunkenness, Rachel guiding him home, while I pretended to sleep in the living room, listening to every word as he clung to her, smelling of alcohol and vomit. I remembered him groaning that he should have married her, that he still wanted her, that if he ever broke free, she would be the one. He had begged her to stay the night. She hadn't, but the seed of truth had been planted in me. And from that moment forward, something inside me had withered. I remembered that night too vividly, the one when Adrian was drunk, and Rachel guided him home, his body reeking of alcohol and vomit. I had pretended to sleep in the living room, but every word reached me like knives through the thin walls. He clung to her, groaning that he regretted proposing to me, that he had been reckless, that if he ever divorced me, she would be the first woman he married. Rachel's smile had been smug, as she teased him, asking who he would choose if he were free, and he whispered that it would be her. Always her. He begged her to stay the night. She laughed, declined, and left him on the sofa because she hated the mess of a man who couldn't hold his liquor. She left the cleaning for me, his wife, and even then I hadn't stormed into the room. I hadn't shouted, hadn't clawed at her, or demanded an explanation. That night was the moment I stopped hoping, the moment I realized that whatever love I thought we had was already gone. The days that followed were the last stretch of our hollow marriage, a stage where I lived beside him, not as a wife, but as a shadow. Tracy was the one who finally threw him out of my hospital room, her fury burning hotter than mine could. But Adrian never stayed away for long. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed violently, his name flooding the screen again and again. He had unblocked me, desperate now, and the messages poured in. He told me I needed to eat well after a miscarriage, that congee with chicken and preserved egg would restore my strength. He promised to cook it for me himself. He reminded me to avoid cold food to keep my stomach warm, that he had already ordered bird's nest soup for me, that he would spend any money if it meant I could heal. Over and over he insisted we should erase the past and begin again. I stared at the words, my heart numb, then silenced the thread, setting my phone to mute. I asked the nurse to move me to a VIP room, one where no one could disturb me, and I made sure Adrian was barred from the door. For days, he tried to break through my silence, his voice on the phone growing more pitiful. His messages pleading for one meeting, one conversation. "Natalie, please," he said on the line. "I only want to see you from afar. I promise not to disturb you." I pressed end, turned off my phone, and drifted into the kind of peace only solitude could bring. 3 days later, I packed my bag and signed my release papers. He was waiting outside the hospital when I walked out, a bouquet of cheap flowers in his hands. His smile stretched wide like we were still newlyweds. "You're out," he said brightly. "Let me take you home." I didn't argue. I slid into the passenger seat and the car purred to life. That was when the Bluetooth speaker betrayed him again, Rachel's syrupy voice spilling into the confined space. "Welcome home, my love," she cooed. "Don't forget to make lots of money for me to spend." Adrian cursed, grabbing for the device, his face twisted with annoyance this time, instead of guilt. "It's a nuisance," he muttered. "I'll throw it out." The speaker dangled in his hand, and I caught his wrist before he could toss it. "No need," I sighed. "I truly don't care anymore." My voice was calm, almost eerily so, and for the first time I saw fear flicker across his face. "Wife," he stammered. "Don't say that. We'll be together soon, just us." Throwing it out will only upset her. And why should we add more conflict? The color drained from his cheeks as my words sank in. I turned to the window, watching Denver blur past the streets wet with last night's rain. I didn't care anymore which woman's voice echoed in his car. When we arrived home, he announced his latest plan as though it were a grand surprise. He told me he had bought plane tickets to Edinburgh for November, that I had always wanted to see the snow there, that now he would finally grant me that wish. I listened silently as he spoke of arrangements already made of friends who would help with accommodations of the beautiful trip ahead. He spoke with the excitement of a man convinced he had redeemed himself. But I remembered the 5 years of marriage when every time I brought up Edinburgh he dismissed me as childish. He said I was naive to dream of leaving work behind to live in peace with the man I loved. He called me impractical, wasting time on fantasies. A year ago, when a friend in the travel business invited me on a group trip to Edinburgh, I had been thrilled. Adrian had heard of my plan, canceled my ticket behind my back, and scolded me with contempt. "Don't be so selfish, Natalie," he had said. "Don't you know your decisions affect others? The country is large, there's enough beauty here." But I knew the truth. That same day, Rachel had called him in tears, confessing she envied me for living a life of independence, for having freedoms she didn't. Adrian, ever eager to soothe her, canceled my trip, as if my joy were a coin he could spend to buy her smile. And now here he was, speaking with pride about the trip he had arranged, as though he were offering me the world. My lips curved into a bitter smile. "Cancel the tickets," I said quietly. His face fell. "Why?" he asked. "Because traveling with you only sours me," I answered. "You irritate me. Your actions ruin my mood, disrupt my work, drain me of peace." I repeated to him the very words he had once used to crush me. The blood drained from his face until he looked ghostly. Opening his mouth but finding no defense, he stared at me in silence, stunned, and I turned from him without hesitation. I walked into the living room, shut the door behind me with a slam that echoed like finality. In the morning when I woke, he was gone already at work, leaving behind only the hollow quiet of a house that had long ceased to feel like home. I called my lawyer and had the divorce agreement drawn up. When the papers arrived, I signed my name with a hand that no longer trembled, left them neatly on the coffee table, and packed my suitcase. Those 3 days in the hospital had not been wasted. Every detail of my departure had already been mapped out in my mind. By the time my plane touched down that afternoon, my phone buzzed to life with dozens of missed calls from Adrian. I ignored them all and sent him only 2 short messages: "Sign the divorce papers, and we part ways peacefully. If you refuse, I will take you to court." At the new branch office, I buried myself in work, every cell of my body humming with purpose. 2 days later, Adrian flew to Aspen, appearing outside my company's gates with a massive bouquet of roses and a rented banner that read, "Natalie, my beloved wife, please forgive me." Security tried to move him, but he resisted his face, set in the stubborn determination of a spoiled man who had never been told no. I had already warned my employees if anyone let him into the building, they would lose their job. On the third day, when the sudden mountain chill set in, Adrian finally collapsed his body, giving into the farce of his own self-punishment, and he was admitted to the hospital. The first thing he did upon waking was to call the police, demanding they summon me. I walked into his hospital room, divorce papers in hand, my expression calm. "Sign them, Adrian," I said, "and we can end this quietly." He sat propped against the pillows, his once confident eyes vacant, his head shaking weakly. "No, Natalie," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I won't sign. I've already cut Rachel off, I swear. I told her not to come near me again. It's over between us. Please forgive me," but I knew better. I knew the break had not been clean. Only 5 days ago, Rachel had bombarded me with endless messages, cursing me, accusing me of forcing Adrian to leave her. She even dared to blame me for my own miscarriage, claiming that heaven itself had punished me for my cruelty. "Women shouldn't make things harder for each other," she said. Why couldn't I be more understanding? I read her words without anger, my lips curling at the irony, and sent only one reply: honestly. "I truly hope the two of you find happiness together. If you can convince him to sign the divorce papers, I will be grateful." A week later, Tracy called me with news that almost made me laugh. After Adrian told her it was over, Rachel had begun haunting his doorstep, standing outside at night, sobbing, pounding on his door, until the neighbors called the police. When officers arrived, she insisted the house was hers, leaning on her cane with defiance, refusing to admit to trespassing or harassment. The neighbors grew weary of her tantrums. The next morning, Adrian opened his door to find his front steps smeared with dog urine, his neighbor's retaliation. That night, unable to stand it any longer, he moved. When we met again, I told him calmly that my feelings for him had long since withered, that the sight of him only disgusted me. Whatever he and Rachel did together no longer mattered to me. All I wanted was a divorce. His eyes widened, glistening with what he hoped I would mistake for pain. He shook his head, desperate. "I can't let you go, Natalie. Please tell me what I must do to make you forgive me. Should I kneel?" His voice cracked with theatrical despair, and before the astonished officers, he pushed himself up from the bed, fell to his knees before me, and slapped his own face with such force that blood welled at the corner of his mouth. "Wife," he sobbed, "I beg you, I cannot live without you." His cries echoed in the sterile room, so pitiful that passing nurses stopped to gawk their eyes wide with sympathy for a man who knew how to perform. Sorrow. But I looked at him with nothing but cold detachment. I remembered too clearly the first night I discovered his affair with Rachel, how I had begged him to stop, to remember our love, to end it with her. I had pleaded, tears streaming, asking him to stay. He had sat on the sofa, then scrolling through his phone, a smile ghosting over his lips as Rachel's messages lit his screen. I had watched his eyes soften for her even as mine burned for him, and when I begged, he turned to me with chilling indifference. "Why must you ruin other people's happiness, Natalie?" he asked. "Can't you stop making love your entire life? No one dies from being left. You suffocate me with your obsession." That night, I stayed awake until dawn, realizing for the first time that my love for him was not enough, that my devotion was not a blessing, but a burden he resented. And now, as he knelt before me with fake tears staining his cheeks, I knew nothing had changed. He was not repentant. He was simply afraid of losing the security I had given him. Adrian's voice cracked, his eyes reddening as he begged. "Can't you forgive me, Natalie?" My silence only drove him further, his tone frantic. "So you have forgiven me, then, haven't you?" "My wife?" I met his pleading gaze and answered with calm clarity. "I forgive you, Adrian, but that doesn't change the fact that I will be filing for divorce. We will see each other in court." I turned, leaving him collapsed on the floor, his face ashen, His body slumped like a man who had just seen his own future slip through his fingers. That night, he caught a red-eye flight back to Denver. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a string of messages, not from him, but from Rachel. She sent me picture after picture of herself and Adrian, smiling beside him, her tone brimming with triumph rather than heartbreak. "I told you," she wrote, "he only needed a break to realize I was the one who truly loved him. Look at this ring, isn't it dazzling? The diamond he bought for me sparkles brighter than anything you ever had. In November, we'll be going to Edinburgh. Don't worry, I'll send you photos from there." I stared at her words without a flicker of emotion before typing a single line. "Then please convince him to sign the divorce papers so you can finally become Mrs. Brooks in the light of day. Don't wait too long, or you might find yourself replaced by another." My message landed like a blow. Rachel erupted, her replies filled with curses, calling me cursed, saying, "Betrayal was my fate, that women like me deserved to be abandoned." She ended with the smug declaration that she would never fall into the same trap I had. I muted her number, not deleting the messages, because in truth, I was waiting, betting that Rachel Cruz's downfall would be more spectacular than mine. 6 months later, I was proven right. Adrian finally severed ties with her. At some point, he must have realized that she only loved his money, that in her eyes, he was little more than a walking ATM. Adrian, the man who prided himself on passion and romance, could never tolerate being treated as nothing but a wallet. He went so far as to have Rachel's 4-year-old son taken away, leveraging the child to force her into signing over the deed of the house he had given her. He made her sell the brand new Mercedes and hand him the cash. That was the breaking point. Rachel lost all composure, screaming at him in a crowded cafe, jabbing her finger at his chest, while her mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You're not short of money," she wailed. "You're pushing me to death. Isn't love supposed to matter more than money? I'm still here beside you. Isn't that enough? Doesn't that mean anything?" She tried to play the part of a tragic lover, but Adrian only watched her with disgust. He wanted a woman's devotion, untainted and pure, something unconditional. He had had that once with me. I had loved him blindly without question, giving him every part of myself. But when a man already has what he claims to want, he often begins to crave the thrill of what is forbidden. Adrian was no different. He wanted the safety of a stable wife and the intoxication of a reckless affair. He wanted me in the shadows while he played with others in the light. I remembered the first time I caught him kissing Rachel in his car. The sight had sickened me, my fury exploding as I demanded an explanation. His response had been chillingly indifferent. "I married you already, Natalie. What more do you want? Every man has flings. That's what makes a man." In that moment, the truth crystallized. Adrian wanted both the security of a marriage to a loyal wife and the fleeting thrill of his first love returned. After Rachel was widowed, he pursued her, openly lavishing money on her, flaunting their closeness. He dared to do it in public because he thought my love chained me, that I would never leave him, that he could play with fire without consequence. He believed the devotion I once gave him was his trump card, a guarantee I would never walk away. But he underestimated me. Even the deepest love can erode until nothing remains but dust. When I told him I wanted a divorce, his panic had been real. For all his arrogance, he wasn't stupid. He knew the women outside his marriage were fleeting blossoms easily replaced. But a stable wife, the home she represented, the quiet devotion that asked for nothing, those things were rare. And he knew, even if he wouldn't say it out loud, that I had loved him far more than Rachel Cruz ever had. So Adrian came crawling back, even falling to his knees in a grotesque display of desperation. He thought that if he begged enough, if he played the martyr convincingly, I would soften, that I would give him one more chance. But he had miscalculated. He had not realized that by the time a woman stops wanting to argue, stops wanting to fight, she has already let go. I no longer wanted reconciliation. I only wanted freedom. The fact that he forced Rachel to return the house and sell the car, handing him back the money, was nothing more than the outcome I had already predicted. Adrian had been placing a price tag on everyone around him since the very beginning. Even years ago, when his family reduced my dowry behind my back, he agreed without hesitation. That was the kind of man he was: calculating, pragmatic, weighing people against their monetary value. Rachel had never been anything more than a garnish on the plate of his comfortable marriage. Once that marriage cracked, she became nothing but a burden. And Adrian never carried burdens he didn't have to. From the start, he had been faithful only to himself. I thought the farce between him and Rachel had finally ended, but 3 months later, Tracy called with fresh gossip that made me pause mid-sentence over a contract. "Babe," she said, "get ready for a show this afternoon at 3. Apparently, Adrian had a new girl, a college senior. We thought he dumped Rachel because she didn't love him, so he clawed back the house and the car. But maybe it wasn't about love at all. Maybe he already had this girl waiting. My pen slipped from my fingers as the truth dawned. Could it be that he was already seeing the student before Rachel's fall? Tracy laughed knowingly. "Of course," she said, "a man like him never stops at one flower. His taste hasn't changed a bit, still reaching for the same type of woman. The girl interns at his company and carries herself with the same smug arrogance Rachel once had, already acting like the lady of the house." I felt a strange curiosity about Rachel then. "Tracy," I asked, "did Rachel ever actually hand over the houses to him?" Tracy chuckled. "No way," she said. "That woman's not that stupid." Instead, she smeared dog and cat blood all over the Mercedes and had it parked right under Adrian's building until the car was practically ruined. As for her child, she never really cared. Seeing her cruelty, even Adrian didn't dare press her about property again. A luxury car worth over $100,000 left to rot wasn't much for a man like him, but it was enough to sour his mood for a week. That was Adrian in a nutshell, forever irritated, forever entitled. And in a twisted way, I almost admired Rachel for making him taste his own medicine. Men like Adrian needed women who refused to play by their rules. By the end of that month, my lawyer summoned me to court. Everything was proceeding smoothly. What I hadn't expected was that Adrian's new girlfriend, Phoebe Carter, would show up in person. Just as Tracy had described, Phoebe was the textbook image of a green-tea girl. She had the look of innocence, wide eyes, and soft smiles, but when you caught her gaze at the right angle, there was steel in it, sharp and calculated. When her eyes landed on me, Adrian's expression flickered with guilt, maybe even regret, but Phoebe moved quickly, clutching his arm with theatrical fear, as if I might snatch him away. "Sister," she sneered, "I've heard everything from Adrian. You've been clinging to him, even dragging your miscarriage into it to play the victim. But it doesn't work anymore. He doesn't love you. He loves me. You must be jealous, but please have some dignity. After the divorce, don't bother us again." I glanced at Adrian, who kept his head lowered, unable to meet my eyes, and I smiled faintly. "Then I wish you both a long life together. May you have children soon." I turned to leave, unwilling to waste another second, but Tracy's hand caught mine. Her sharp eyes flicked to Phoebe. "You say Adrian loves you," she said coolly, "but tell me, has he bought you a house yet? Did he tell you he once gave away a whole property to his first love? Did he mention that part while convincing you you're special?" Phoebe's smile froze the color draining from her face. Rage sparked in her eyes as she turned on Adrian, her grip on his arm tightening. He still refused to look at me, his silence damning. Tracy tugged me toward the door, and as we left, Phoebe's shrill curses echoed behind us. That night, I booked a flight back to Denver, but by the following afternoon, the local news was already ablaze with the kind of headline that makes people pause mid-breath. A college student devastated by love had stormed into another woman's home to confront a mistress, and in the chaos, one person ended up dead, while another lay wounded. When the footage aired, my body went cold. The images of the living room were too familiar. I stared at the television, unable to process what I was seeing, unable to guess who was dead and who was barely hanging on. It wasn't until the internet lit up with leaked details that the truth became clear. After Adrian moved out of the luxury apartment he once flaunted, Rachel moved in as if planting her flag on conquered territory. But when Phoebe discovered that he had once given Rachel the deed, her jealousy erupted like wildfire. No one knew how she got the address, but one afternoon she showed up unannounced, demanding that Rachel sign the place over to her. Adrian tried to intervene, but the two women clashed viciously. Rachel, shaking with rage, ran into the kitchen and came back clutching a knife, her eyes wild. Adrian turned pale, but Phoebe, reckless and too young to grasp the gravity, stood her ground. "You're nothing but a conniving leech," Phoebe spat. "Sign the deed or I'll make your life hell every single day." Rachel's face contorted, her voice breaking as she screamed, "You think you're the victim, you're the homewrecker. If it weren't for you, Adrian and I would never have broken apart." Then she lunged. The blade sliced into Adrian as he tried to pull them apart, driving deep enough that he staggered, blood staining his shirt. Phoebe slapped Rachel across the face, the sound sharp as a gunshot. The two women wrestled, their screams echoing down the hall, until Rachel stumbled backward, slipped off the balcony, and hit the ground. She died instantly. The police arrived within minutes, sealing off the building and hauling Phoebe away in handcuffs. Tracy called me as soon as she heard her voice, trembling with a mix of guilt and disbelief. "Babe," she whispered, "I just found out Rachel had bipolar disorder. If I hadn't taunted Phoebe with the story about that apartment, maybe this never would have happened." Tracy was blunt, sometimes cutting with her words, but her heart had always been in the right place. I reassured her, though deep down I knew she was wrong to blame herself. If Phoebe hadn't mocked me in court, Tracy never would have thrown those words back at her. And if Phoebe hadn't been so consumed by her own greed, she wouldn't have hunted Rachel down. The tragedy had been inevitable. Rachel's end was written by her own choices, just as Adrian's downfall was. As I sat with the thought, I realized something grim but undeniable. The beginning of the end of my marriage had centered on that apartment, and now the blood-soaked conclusion circled back to it as well. Perhaps fate had been guiding the story all along. The trial that followed was swift. Phoebe was sentenced, and Adrian, though spared from death, was not spared justice. The assault, the negligence, the years of deception, they all caught up with him. He too was convicted and given prison time. 8 days later, I received the final court ruling on my divorce. I had won. The marriage that had shackled me for 5 bitter years was officially over. Tracy was waiting outside the courthouse with her usual irreverent grin, a bouquet of sunflowers in her arms. "Congratulations, babe," she said, looping her arm through mine. "Welcome to your new life." I took the flowers, their golden faces turned toward the sun, and felt the warmth seep into me. For the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. For the first time, the air didn't feel heavy. For the first time, I was free. It had been far too long. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos.